and I followed it for 6 months, and it grew and grew and grew, and I think it's the kind of story that anybody can do. It doesn't take a lot of skills or expertise in any area, it's just humanity. That's what I think this story is mostly about. How many of you guys have read The Girl in the Window? How many of y'all have seen the multimedia? Okay, I'm going to start out with that. I'm sorry if it overlaps, but I thought for people who hadn't read it, my worst talent as a journalist is multimedia, and this was the very first thing that I had ever done as multimedia. And to be really honest, we had worked on this story for about 4 months. We were going to publish it in Easter, and we went to have a meeting with all of our editors and the photo editor, and they were like, "Oh, that's great! Oh my God, we love your story. We love your photos." Melissa Little did the wonderful photos. They were like, "Well, what do you have for the web?" And we went, we hadn't even thought about the web. We hadn't done anything for the web. So we went back. They gave us another 6 weeks, and we went back and we re-interviewed people on audio. We did some video to go with it. So it's really a multimedia. It's audio under slides. It's stills. It's a little bit of video. It's me talking. This won a couple prizes, which now I don't think 2 years later it would have won anything because it's very remedial if you see it. But we'll show it first and give you an overview of what was on the website. The other thing, I left them starting at the end, but when they said they wanted to do a multimedia on the web, I was kind of selfish as a writer, and I thought, gosh, I don't want people to just watch the video and not read my story. You know, I worked really hard on the story. And I had a lot of foot dragging about it. But the guy who runs our website put a tracker on it, and we found out at the end, we had 1 million views in the first week of the story. It crashed the website of the St. Pete Times. They had to hire a new consultant guy to put more parameters in to get comments and stuff. But what they figured out about a month after the story ran was that as many people were coming to the video and then reading the story as they were reading the story and then coming to the video. So I was like, yes! People are still reading our words, you know. This story ran real long. It was, I don't know that they do this anymore 2 years later. You know, the cost of print newspaper and all of our sections have shrunk. I don't know if you guys are having that problem too. When I started the St. Pete Times, 60 inches was a really average length for a Sunday story. Now if I get I covered features at the St. Petersburg Times for about 8 years at that time. And a lot of I don't have a beat, you know, as a feature writer, a pretty general assignment. But a lot of my stories tend to be about children, foster care, social services type issues. And I worked with this woman who was the PR director for the Heart Gallery in Tampa. Do you guys probably all have art galleries in your area? Do you know what those are? Mine are for stories. And Heart Galleries is this organization that partners with the local children's boards. I think they're in every state. And they take portraits of children who are in foster care who are the hardest to adopt. So it's kids with special needs, it's kids who are in multiple sibling groups, it's biracial kids, kids from other countries, kids that aren't in the sort of we want a kid top of the list. And they take these beautiful portraits of them, and they do a little soundbite, and they put them up at like malls or video arcades or festivals in town. So I don't mean to sound crass, but it's kind of like the pet of the month. You know, like fall in love with this beautiful little face and this story and want to take this kid home. And that's the idea behind it. And this woman had been doing the Heart Gallery for about, I think, 12 years. And she'd call me every year and she'd go, "Oh, we're going to put up, 200 new pictures in Tyrone Square Mall. Come to a story." And I was always like, well, that's a brief. The Heart Gallery opens at the mall is a brief in our paper. But if you can find me a really cool kid in the Heart Gallery or a really cool family that's trying to adopt a kid and I could follow them through that process and narrate it, then I'd love to do a story. And it took her about 3 years. I mean, part of my tip here is like work with your PR people because a lot of times they pitch really stupid things at you, but you can train them. You can turn. They do. I mean, I'm sorry to all PR people, but the press releases sometimes I'm like, But if you tell them what you want, if you talk to them about what type of story you want to tell or what access you're going to need, you really can work with them, and they are so incredibly helpful. So she called me in January of 2008 and said, "We have this little girl, she's been in the Heart Gallery for about 6 months. We thought she's 7 years old. She's the worst case of child neglect I've ever seen in my life." And this woman had been doing it for years. And she said, our best hope for her was that she was going to be put in a nursing home. And my son Tucker was the same age as Danny at that time that they called me. And he was 9 years old. And I thought, oh my gosh, the best thing you can hope for a little girl is a life in a nursing home? And it just broke my heart. She said, but this family's come forward, and they didn't know anything about this little girl. They saw her face, They fell in love with her face. That first picture you saw where she's got really short, dark hair, and her eyes kind of look real vacant, that was the picture in the art gallery. So this family comes, they have a little boy already, they want to adopt a sibling for their little boy. And they see this face and they say, oh, this is the little girl we want. Don't know anything about her. And as they start asking questions and finding out she was left alone in this room, covered with cockroach bites, had never eaten anything, never seen the sunlight, never been held, never been talked to, just left alone on this filthy mattress with a bottle of chocolate milk, pretty much for the first about 8 years of her life. The reason, actually Tucker picked the title for the story was because the reason they found her was a neighbor who'd seen this house across the street for like 7 years, finally saw a little girl's face in the window. And at first they thought it was an angel, and then they thought it was a ghost, and then they thought, no, I'm imagining things. And one of the neighbors had called her minister and prayed about it, and somebody else had walked by the house several more times and never seen a kid in the yard, never seen a kid get into the car. And so finally someone called social services. And, you know, if that hadn't happened, the police officer who narrated at the beginning of the part said she would have died within a week. They went to investigate, found her basically curled up on the floor covered in feces. He picks her up, she can't look at him, she can't talk, and she basically just like falls into his arms like a limp little rag doll. And he took her to the hospital where she spent almost a year in the pediatric hospital at Tampa General, trying to figure out what was wrong with her, trying to figure out what had happened to her, what could they do for her, put her in a medical needs foster care home after that for about 6 months. And so by the time I got to her, this family had already taken her in. And then I did something I've never done in 20 years of reporting. I let somebody else broker my access for this story. Have you guys ever done that? It's terribly scary and antithetical. Like, I don't want anybody else talking to them about what I need or what I want. But the family that was adopting her was very private, very Christian, very blue-collar, Tampa Bay area. And they didn't want to be in the media at all. And they didn't want me coming in there, and they were worried that we were going to make her look like an animal, and the foster worker was calling her a feral child, and what did that mean? And so they were very, very hesitant. And the lady from the art gallery said, let me talk to her social worker, because we think this story is so important to help other foster kids. I mean, they had a motivation, not for me to get a great prize and tell a great story, but to get other kids adopted. And their premise was, if somebody's going to adopt a little girl who has this many special needs, somebody might come forward and adopt the other 870 kids in foster care in Tampa Bay, Florida. So 6 months reporting the story, on and off. They were 3 hours away, so we went down on the weekends mostly, 3 or 4 days at a time. And during the 6 months, see, this is the everybody can do this, because I know nobody's going to get 6 months off to do a story anymore, right? That would be like in the dreamland. But I did 24 other stories in those 6 months. So I was really trying to keep one a week at least in the mix, so they would let me keep working on this. And of course, a lot of that was my own time. But it grew. You know, at first it was going to be a really happy Sunday story about a little girl who they didn't think was going to get adopted, got adopted. The end, yay. But then the more I looked into it, and I got really obsessed with the idea of feral children, and I started doing all this research about how rare it was and how they could be helped, and the neurological development that's lost when you don't have speech for the first 7 years of your life, and started interviewing psychologists and psychiatrists and speech pathologists, and found that the story was really a lot more than just this one little girl. We decided to go back and try to tell the story from the beginning, which usually I don't like to have to recreate stuff, but we'd missed that first 1.5 years since she'd been rescued. So when we found the police officer at the beginning of that video, he was golden. I mean, he was like tall and strong and handsome and had this great voice, but as soon as you brought up her name, he started crying. And I'd never seen a cop cry before, you know, and he had a son about the same age, and he remembered everything. He kept saying, I wonder what happened to her, you know, I always wondered what happened to her. So we had him take us through that day, through the evidence photos, and that's what you saw at the beginning. But he basically sat with us on his laptop and walked us through everything that had happened. And we had to stop the audio like 4 times because he just started crying. It was just so emotional for him. But that allowed me to recreate that scene. Between him and the social worker that was there that day, we were able to sort of piece together, and that's where the story started, was the moment that the neighbor saw the face in the window, and then the cop came in and took the little girl away. So that whole first section, the story was in 3 parts, and the whole first section was recreated with as much, you know, interviews and videos, stills as we could create from police files and stuff.